Hey, good morning. Good morning, good morning. Let me get my screens set up. I'm very particular about how my screens are set up when I'm presenting virtually. Okay. Okay, can everybody hear me all right? Give me a thumbs up. Beautiful. Okay, so my name's Chelsea Davis. Happy to see all of you again, or some of you who weren't here for the first one. That's totally fine. I'm going to do a quick recap of some of the content I covered last week. I actually have been out of the office since Tuesday. I presented to y'all, finished out my work day, and had the rest of the week off, and I'm back in the office for the first time today. So I feel like I need a little recap, a little refresher. I've not been in work mode for a whole week. So that's what we'll start with, but this is part 2. This is more of the implementation of trauma-informed care. So what are my suggestions, and really they're the suggestions of people much smarter than me, on how your organization or you as a professional can have a trauma-informed approach to your work. Okay, so I am the trauma trainer for the Women's Center of Tarrant County. I don't think I have our agency overview. Yeah, I don't have a slide for our agency overview today just because I talked about it last week, but just a very, very simple recap. Our mission is to inspire and empower women, men, and children to overcome violence, crisis, and poverty. So we are called the Women's Center, but we serve men. We will provide services to anybody, no matter their gender identity. I specifically work in our Rape, Crisis, and Victim Services Department. So we are the Rape Crisis Center for Tarrant County. That means we provide free services to victims of sexual violence or abuse, therapy, case management, hospital accompaniment for someone who is seeking treatment after a sexual assault. We also have legal assistance and a 24/7 crisis hotline. My team specifically is violence prevention and education. So we are part of a community-wide systemic effort to prevent violence from ever happening in the first place. And we do that primarily through education. I specialize in professional education and professional trainings on issues of trauma, sexual violence, and how to best serve victims of trauma. So that's just a little overview of what I do. So this is sort of my bread and butter presentation, is how can an agency or individual be trauma informed? Let's get started. So we're going to outline, we're going to start with a recap of trauma and some trauma related behaviors, and then we'll move into some elements of trauma informed agencies. We're going to have a little bit of practice, so please participate in the chat. It will be very boring if you don't, or I'll just talk, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and ideas. And then we're going to finish up with discussing the professional individuals experience with what we call vicarious trauma. So if that's a new concept to you, don't worry, we'll dive into it. If it's not, hopefully you can take something new away from our discussion of it today. So really quickly, let's overview my definition of trauma. So you can see here, this comes from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, right? So they have written a book really on trauma-informed care and behavioral health settings, and that's where I pull a ton of my content from. But this is the definition of trauma that I like. So remember from last week, we said trauma doesn't target its impact. You might only see one element of how a traumatic experience has impacted someone, but you're not seeing all the other things, right? There's a lot to our response to trauma that impacts our entire being, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, etc. Okay, so trauma can really be anything that's experienced as adverse or harmful or life-threatening. We have 4 different types of trauma, 4 different categories. So the individual trauma, that's what one person experiences as an individual. Intergenerational trauma is more of the trauma that kind of goes on within a family system or a close system of support, or is passed down through generations, right? Historical trauma this is more of, we're moving outside of the individual experience and we're looking more at a systemic experience. How has a group across generations experienced trauma? So this is, think about that intergenerational trauma and move that to an entire group that shares an identity, right? How they have experienced trauma over time and how that's contributing to their response to individual trauma, right? And then institutional trauma. That's that usually it comes from people with power, from systems with power to, and it's used as oppression. It's used as a way to continue traumatizing certain groups to maintain power over them. So what we're trying to express here is that we may, within our work, within whatever role you play, whatever agency you're at, you may only be interacting with an individual and seeing their individual experiences with trauma and helping them heal from those individual experiences with trauma. But it's important to hold in mind, you might be working with someone who comes from a history or has a background of this historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, institutional trauma, that below the surface impact that you might not be able to see. But they're coming to you with that. They're coming to you with these experiences, and it's affecting the way they're responding to the things that are happening. We also want to talk about toxic stress, because what ongoing trauma does to us when we experience ongoing trauma, whether it's individual or institutional, either end of that spectrum, it creates toxic stress in us. When we have strong, frequent, or prolonged adversity and we don't have adequate support, it is a prolonged activation of our body's stress response. That fight, flight, or freeze response. And when we have to navigate that over and over and over again, particularly at a young age, it disrupts the development of our brains, our other organ systems. It increases our risk for stress-related disease, cognitive impairment, and all sorts of negative outcomes for us, okay? So toxic stress is basically you're living in fight, flight, or freeze. That can be your own individual experience. That can be from institutional trauma. You have an identity that other people see as, for whatever reason, less than, and they contribute to your feeling of, I'm not safe. My fight, flight, or freeze is activated over and over and over again because of the color of my skin, because of my gender identity, because of my sexual orientation. Institutional trauma has created a lack of feeling safe, and that's creating this toxic stress. So we always want to hold in mind and keep in mind, this can be individual and this can be systemic. Okay. But we talked last week about the adverse childhood experiences study that showed us just how much of an impact this toxic stress can have. Increased rates of alcohol dependence, substance abuse, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, unintended pregnancies, all sorts of negative outcomes, reduced economic opportunities, reduced educational opportunities, okay? Because trauma really does live in us and it spreads and it affects us in the long term. When we have this long-term traumatic experience, and sometimes it's a short-term traumatic experience, it creates triggers, right? And most of you are familiar with this. This is another recap for us, but triggers are just your brain's way of alerting you to a threat. As we experience trauma, our brain remembers that experience and files it away as something dangerous. And when something dangerous is going on, our brain becomes hyper-focused on, okay, what am I seeing, hearing, feeling? Where are the threats coming from? Right? And those are the details that become really ingrained with that memory. So after the fact, you might not remember the context, the sequence of events, everything that was going on, but you're probably going to remember sight, sounds, smells, feelings, right? Because that's what your brain was hyper focused on. It was focused on threats and navigating threats, and that's what it's remembering. So all of this manifests when you experience something that reminds you of that trauma. Maybe one piece of that sensory data is repeated, a sight, a sound, a smell. even if the actual situation is completely different. It can just take one similar thing to remind you of that trauma. And your brain's going to say, this reminds me of something dangerous. We need to go to survival mode just in case. We had a client here at the Women's Center who told her therapist a story of, she was walking through a department store and all of a sudden felt panicked, right? Had picked up all these things she was planning to buy and then felt this intense fear and dropped her items and got out of the store. Had no concept of what made me feel so afraid. There was no threat that she could perceive in that department store, but her body recognized something as threatening and told her, fight, flight, or freeze, you need to get out. So as later on, she's processing this with her therapist, and her therapist, who understands triggers, is saying, all right, well, let's go through sensory data. What maybe did you hear? What did you see? What did you smell? And they finally narrowed it down to, she had been walking by the cologne and the perfume counter and had smelled the cologne that her perpetrator had been wearing at the time of the assault. And that smell registered in her mind, brought up that traumatic memory and said, last time we smelled that, we weren't safe, we need to get away. It happened so instinctively, she wasn't even consciously aware of it. That's how triggers work. Okay. And they aren't always specific sight, sound, smells. They might be bigger feelings of, someone's mad at me, I'm in trouble, things are changing, I'm losing control. And I'm responding as if I'm being threatened because I feel like I'm being threatened. So overall, we get these trauma-related behaviors, complaining of physical problems, avoidance, right? So if you've got this long list of triggers and all sorts of things that make you feel unsafe, you might start to avoid leaving your home, being around certain people, because you just don't know what's going to bring up this trauma. I don't feel strong enough to deal with it. I'm just going to lock myself away and avoid situations. Irritability, aggressiveness, excessive clinginess, difficulty concentrating, isolation, problems sleeping. We see with our younger clients, a lot of that trauma is expressed through play, or regressing to younger behaviors. Okay, so these are all behaviors, attitudes, mindsets that can be related to someone's trauma. And ultimately, when someone has this experience with trauma, they develop coping skills to deal with it. Nobody wants to live stuck in their triggers, stuck in their trauma-related behaviors. It can feel like you're frozen in that. And so people develop adaptive behaviors. They develop behaviors to adapt and get through life, navigating this long list of triggers and things that feel threatening. And that's what we call trauma adaptive behaviors. It's the actions, attitudes, and perspectives that someone takes on as their best and most resilient attempt to rise above their traumatic experience. It can be minimizing it. It can be denial. It can be hyperfixating on it. Abusing substances, abusing food, self-harm. Some of these behaviors are not healthy. And on the outside looking in, we can look at this client and see, man, you're not helping yourself by using these adaptive behaviors that you've developed. But we have to respect them for what they are and understand you have done the best that you can to get through every day. And if I'm going to sit here and tell you these adaptive behaviors are not healthy, I've got to be prepared to help you replace them, right? Or at least connect you with someone who can. So when we have this trauma adaptive awareness, it helps us shift from the problem mindset, which says, what is wrong with you? And instead we move to the resilience mindset that you're doing the best that you can. Right? How somebody responds to their trauma, it depends on so many factors. What type of trauma it is, their own history, developmental factors, sociocultural attributes, available resources, right? All of these factors are going to shape how someone responds to trauma and how they view themselves and other people. And when we shift this perspective to saying, you're doing the best that you can, instead of what is wrong with you, what we're doing is preventing re-traumatization. Because too often we blame our clients for their trauma adaptive behaviors without recognizing that is the very skill that has helped them survive, right? And we are now punishing them for it, judging them for it, withholding services because of it, when it's the very thing that's gotten them to today. So if we can see you're doing the best that you can, we're avoiding that re-traumatization. It helps us collaborate with them, and it helps us and the client reframe their situation, right? This is the essence of strength-based care. Okay, it helps you and the client see their own determination, self-preservation, and creativity. And this is what we really want to cultivate in our clients and in ourselves. So before I move into my implementation, are there any thoughts, questions, anything? That was a quick overview or recap, but is there anything we want to touch on before we move into implementing trauma-informed care? Thank you for the thumbs up. Just want to give people time. Some people, need time to gather their thoughts and type it out. It's always a little bit of a delay when we're waiting on the chat. So just want to give everyone a chance to share. Okay. Let's move on. So implementing trauma-informed care. You did see this last time. So recovery is dependent on, for someone who's got a history of trauma, for them to recover and heal, that's often dependent on what's the history of the trauma, how complex it is. So remember, complex trauma is when someone's got more than one kind, right? This isn't a competition, but we are going to see a different set of struggles, barriers, and issues when we're working with someone who's got an acute trauma. So one type of trauma, one time, one instance, versus someone who's got that historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, institutional trauma on top of an individual experience with sexual assault or an individual experience with an acute trauma, right? It is going to be a different process for healing. There is going to be a lot more to sort of unpack and uncover there. So how complex the trauma is matters. And then what is the response of their support system? Are they being met with that resilience mindset that says you're doing the best that you can, I am on your team? Or are they being met with systems, professionals, services that continue to re-traumatize them, continue to kind of kick them when they're down, make their trauma adaptive behaviors something for them to be ashamed of or punished for, etc.? Are they being met with that mindset? Because that is going to hinder their healing. So the response of support is what we're really going to dive into. How do the places and people that these clients go to for support respond to their trauma? Are we meeting them with the question of what's happened? Like, what has happened to you? Something has happened out of your control and it wasn't your fault. Let's talk about it. Or are we meeting with them? Are we meeting them with the perspective of what's wrong with you? That's what we want to move away from. Okay. So these are the things that we really need to build into our practice to ensure that they are trauma-informed care, and to ensure that they're trauma-informed, and to ensure that they're beneficial for someone with a history of trauma. Something I want to make very clear here is that these types of services are going to help and benefit and be really good for clients without a history of trauma, right? Something we'll learn is that trauma-informed care, while it can be challenging to implement, it is not rocket science in a lot of ways, right? Something I'll try to help us see throughout the rest of this presentation is that it's often meeting the needs that we all have. But without a history of trauma, you might not need the extra support to get that met, right? For example, felt safety. Feeling safe is different than being safe. Well, someone without a history of trauma might not be a reach for them to feel safe. They've got no reason not to feel safe. They don't have triggers. They don't have traumatic experiences, right? But they still need to feel safe. They still need to feel like they have a voice and that their decisions and their opinions and ideas are being heard. A lot of these things aren't groundbreaking. It's what we all want to feel and experience, in any situation we're in, especially a situation when we're feeling kind of vulnerable. Okay, so these are some of those foundational things that we are trying to carry into our work in order to be trauma informed, right? These are kind of the key building blocks. So there are 6 specific elements of trauma-informed care, of a trauma-informed organization, and this comes from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, that's what we call it. They wrote a book called Trauma-Informed Care and Behavioral Health Science, and it's all about how to create an environment and an agency that is conducive to supporting clients and staff, particularly clients and staff who've experienced trauma. Okay, so this approach is multifaceted and it incorporates all levels of the agency. Okay, everybody has a role to play in trauma-informed care. So these are the 6 elements that we are going to be going through during our presentation today. So let's start with collaboration, okay? The first one here is collaborating with the client and collaborating with other service providers, okay? We want our clients to play as active of a role as possible in creating their service plan, choosing their next steps, right? We want to be transparent, have clients be a part of the process. Choices are very empowering. When we're talking specifically about victims of abuse, sexual violence, intimate partner violence, we know that the root of those types of trauma, those types of violence, the root of it is power and control, right? All the time, always. The root of that violence is power and control. So when we're working with survivors of that type of violence, we are mindful and incredibly intentional to try to, at every step of the way, give them control, empower them. We're not giving them power because it's not ours to give them, right? We are helping them recognize you do have power here. Someone has tried to take it away from you, and that wasn't their right. You have power. You have a say, okay? You get to make choices, okay? We're giving them that sense of, that feeling of power. We're giving them that back, all right? We want to make sure we're familiarizing ourselves and our clients with other trauma-informed services. We need to have relationships with local service providers that are trauma-informed, okay? I think somebody raised a hand. I don't think that they can ask a question out loud because we're on our webinar, but if there is a question, you can put it in the chat or the Q&A. If you feel like it. Or maybe you just wanted to raise your hand and say hi. That's okay too. Oops. Oh, goodness. Okay, it doesn't take much to throw me off. You know, with virtual presentations, I feel like everything's finely tuned and one wrong click and I'm in a totally different presentation. So we want to collaborate. We want to make sure that we're partnering with agencies that are also trauma informed. Too often, okay, too many times, we are referring our clients to other agencies or service providers that are not trauma informed and that are just going to re-traumatize them the second they walk in the door. Or we are sending them on this wild goose chase to find the right resource for them, right? If you've worked in the nonprofit field for long enough, you know, nonprofits come and go every 24 hours, it feels like. They pop up, they offer these resources, they've got this website, and then a week later, the agency doesn't exist anymore. Or the person that was in charge of that moved. There's such high turnover that now they're offering this. They got a new grant, so now they're doing this, right? It can be very hard to keep up with, and it can be very overwhelming for our clients, right? We have a helpline here at the Women's Center, and the reason it's a standalone helpline. The reason it's on its own is because they're constantly, the volunteers that staff that helpline are constantly checking through, making sure if we're going to give someone a resource, it's accurate, it's up to date, they still do what they say they can do, and we make sure that that client can get connected to them. Okay. And we make sure it's a trauma-informed service. We want to collaborate with the right kinds of service providers. By right, I mean also trauma-informed. And we also have to recognize that we cannot do everything for everyone. We hold a piece of the puzzle, right? A piece of the puzzle for this person's healing. We don't have all the pieces, though. That would be ineffective. And so we have to be able and ready to say, here's the piece of the puzzle I can help you with, but I cannot do these other things. I recognize the limits of my practice, the limits of my services. Let's find who else holds the other pieces to that puzzle for you, and let's collaborate. We want to try our best to rise above some of the competitiveness that can exist in the nonprofit world. I wouldn't have known that there was such a thing as, that nonprofit drama until I got into the field, but it's there and it's real. And we have to be willing to navigate it as professionals and say, look, I hold a piece, you hold a piece. How can we work together? I don't want to feel like I'm holding clients, here without sharing them. We don't want to play that game, right? We want to collaborate. We want to work with other resource providers and service providers to do the best that we can for our clients. Okay. Okay. The next part here is viewing the individual as a whole. So this is where we're going to get into the concept of intersectionality, right? Understanding that trauma impacts the whole person. So to be trauma informed, we have to work with the client with the whole person in mind, okay? Their gender identity, their class, race, ethnicity, their language, nationality, their perspectives on mental health, physical health, their current mental health, their current physical health, their ability level. Do they have any disabilities? Their age and their sexuality. We have to know that each of these pieces of their identity is going to uniquely shape how they respond to services, how they respond to trauma, what types of trauma they might have experienced. And we have to be willing to take that as it is and not see it as a barrier, but see it as, okay, this is a unique circumstance. I've got to know how to work with this person and help them, right? We have to reference, we have to be aware of language barriers. Do we have opportunities for our clients to access language lines? What about culture, different cultures where maybe there's different perspectives on gender roles and how to interact. Maybe men and women don't feel comfortable speaking to each other in this culture, and we've got to be able to meet their needs regardless, right? Culture influences how people might interpret and make meaning of events, right? They might have individual beliefs about personal responsibility, systems of support. They might have different beliefs on healing and all sorts of steps to their process of overcoming their trauma. And we've got to respect, where are they coming from? What do they believe? What's meaningful to them? What feels supportive to them, right? We have to view them through all of these various lenses and know these different identities that make up this whole person can directly or indirectly impact their attitudes, their beliefs, their behaviors, their resources, their opportunities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we have to look at these, again, not as barriers, not as, oh God, okay, they have this really weird belief about XYZ thing. What am I going to do? But see it as, okay, where's the strength here? Let me find the strength. Let me validate and affirm this part of who you are. And when we're talking about intersectionality, we have to understand that just because maybe two clients have some of these identities in common doesn't mean they've had the same experience, right? Intersectionality, in a nutshell, is saying that all the different identities that make us who we are, they all intersect to create a unique lived experience. And the more marginalized identities a person possesses, the more marginalized identities that intersect for them, the more unique of an experience they're going to have, and often the more traumatic of experience they can have, right? And just because I share maybe one identity with someone doesn't mean we're going to share all of our lived experiences. So what I mean by that, if I, as a white woman and talking to a Black woman, it would be very short-sighted of me to say, well, we're both women. We know how it is. We get it. We've got the same experience because we share that identity. Well, that identity intersects with all of our other identities, which are different. We have two different racial identities. That's created two unique lived experiences for us. And it would be ignorant of me to ignore that entire part of who this woman is and assume we know what our lives are like. We've got the same experience because we're both women. We can't ignore the impact that any of these elements have on people's real lived experiences, okay? And we have to be willing to say, I don't know what that's like. I've never lived that. I've never been in your shoes, okay? I don't know what that's like. And then we have to be willing to learn what it's like and really listen and hear from some of the individuals in the larger groups within those communities to know what it's like. But we can't ever make an assumption just because we share one identity. That's ignoring how intersectionality works. Are there any questions about this? Any questions about viewing the individual as a whole? Are there any experiences you guys have had with maybe some specific situations or general situations where you've had to really work with someone who might have a different identity than you and overcome that as an agency or as a professional? Does anyone have any thoughts on that or any experiences? While you guys are hopefully putting something in the chat, I'll share one. So when I was working in schools for a long time, and I worked in a community that had a large population of refugee families from Myanmar, and they were particularly called the Chin people. They were from the Chin state of Myanmar, and it was hard at times to figure out how the best effective way to communicate with them, because a lot of things would come in the mail, and that wasn't the norm for them to get mail and open mail and read it. Half the time it was in English and they couldn't read it anyway. And even if we'd gotten it written in Chin, which was their language, a lot of the parents didn't really read or write much anyway. And so we were finding that a lot of the mail we were sending home from the school was not getting opened or addressed. And so we had the idea, which sometimes that's what this looks like, is you just try stuff out. And we got a little picture of the Chin flag, their state flag, and we started putting that on the front of any mail that we sent home from them to sort of register to them, like, open this, read this, open this, look at this. And it was really effective. We just learned by putting the Chin flag, it communicated a sense of, oh, I'm being seen. This is something safe. This is something connected to me. And we found that was really effective with them. And that's obviously very, very simple and was by no means the extent of our working cross-culturally with the Chin people. But it was one of those little things that we thought, okay, what can we do to communicate a sense of connectivity, a sense of, hey, we're with you here. We see you, we respect your culture, we love your culture, we want to come with you in that. And it ended up being really effective. So, just a little success story. I'm looking in the chat. I see someone says, I worked in maternal mental health, and it was important for me to remember that each pregnancy is different and each person's experience is different. Absolutely. Physically, emotionally, mentally. Cultural differences really made a difference in how people experience their pregnancies and their postpartum experience. And it was quite a learning experience for myself. Absolutely. That's a wonderful example of something that culture shapes the feelings an individual might have. Culture shapes the feelings an individual might have about their pregnancy and when they get pregnant and the gender of their child and what their birth plan is. All of that is going to be affected. I see someone that says teens and young adults will not really trust you or work on trauma unless you meet them where they are without judgment for their maladaptive coping strategies. absolutely. I worked for a long time with teens, and nobody can sniff out, I was going to use a bad word. Nobody, disingenuousness. Is that a word? Nobody can tell you're not being genuine as quick as a teenager can tell you're not being genuine. So it's almost like freeing in a sense that I was like, I'm just going to be myself. And that's the only way I connect with these teens. But that's exactly right. A sense of non-judgmentalness. I'm a CASA advocate working with children. I find myself trying to group them with my own grandchildren who come from completely different backgrounds. Susan, that is such good insight. I think that that's incredibly true. We find ourselves doing that all the time. We might think, well, my grandkids would like this or would not like this or need this or don't need this. But these kids aren't your grandkids, right? They don't maybe come from the same background or group or experience. And we can't always place those expectations on them. I think it's really good that you are recognizing you're trying to do that, maybe as a way to say, these are the kids I love most in the world, my grandkids. Let me connect with these kids on the same plane. Not always bad, but again, it might not be meeting all of the needs of that individual as a whole person. I know of men who are seeking therapy services and would prefer a male to speak with and have trouble finding access to one. That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. We don't have any male therapists in our rape crisis department right now. You know, can often feel like a needle in the haystack trying to find a male therapist for a male client. And that can be a huge barrier. That's definitely true. Okay, thanks for sharing. I hope that you guys continue to share because it's way more fun when I hear from you guys rather than just talking to myself. All right, so let's keep going. Oh, someone said, I am also a CASA and I work with teens with intergenerational and sexual trauma. They often feel more comfortable with friends of a different ethnicity than their own, and we are accepting of all. That's good. Yeah. You never know what someone's going to find a sense of comfort in, a sense of connectivity in. And we always want to appreciate, respect, and recognize what someone's doing, which kind of brings us into the next element here, which is it's strengths-based and strengths-focused. Trauma-informed care is always strengths-based and strengths-focused. So we want to approach our clients with the attitude of, what are we already doing well? I am not here to fix you. I am not here to solve all your problems or to give you all the answers because I don't have them, right? A lot of the healing, this sounds kind of cheesy, but a lot of the healing lives within our clients already. It's a matter of how do we access that? How do we tap into your resilience and your abilities that you already have to heal and overcome? How do we harness that and really move forward in your healing journey, right? How do we work with our clients to identify what are the strengths they already have and how can we develop more of them, right? When we use this approach, we're validating their resilience. Okay, so we want to ask things like strengths-based questions. What are some things that are going well in your life, in your job, in your relationships? What do you think has helped you get by when you've gone through something really difficult? You know, let's think about a time that was really hard for you and how did you get through it? What'd you do? Right? And then helping them see in their own history, man, I've gotten through a lot and I've survived a lot. And here's how I did it. Sometimes by the skin of my teeth, but I did it. So I can do it again. I can do it now. Okay. We can use what we call scaling questions. So when we use a scaling question, it's when we present a scale, okay, like 1, 0 to 10, and we follow it up with some questions. So what we're doing is scaling a problem with the client, and it helps them identify some of their own motivations or intentions. So let's say, you know, and looking at this situation, you're talking to a client, we're looking at the situation. If 0 is the worst that the situation can be and 10 is the best, what number would you give your current situation, right? And if they say, okay, it's probably a 5 right now, then it's like, okay, what makes it a 5? What do you feel like is contributing to it being anything above 0? What keeps you from slipping down? What kept you from saying 2 or 3 or 1? And helping them see like, okay, we're better off than we could be right now. Okay. Or, maybe a month ago you would have said it was a 7. So what was going on at that time? What do you feel like that looked like for you? And how can we maybe move back up this scale? That's a very specific example, but it's a way to help someone visualize, here's where I'm at. And I'm here because of some strengths that I've tapped into, some resources I've connected to. I could be down here and I'm not. I could be up here. How can I get there? Right? Or just simply giving them a space to share their perspective. What do you think about what's going on? How do you make sense of what's been happening to you, your trauma, this experience, your victimization, your assault? How would you explain this to me or someone else? Really helping them put into their own words what's happened to them, right? Rather than being another service provider who's like, I'm going to tell you what your problem is. That's not going to help. We need them to identify, what is it that I need? What's happened to me? And what is it that I need? And when we do this, we're helping them identify tools and skills. We're fostering some more of those trauma resistant, those protective factors that we want to see our clients developing. Okay. We're validating their resilience. We understand that, hey, these coping behaviors have been your best attempt to deal with life. And you don't need to feel guilt or shame for that. Okay. How can we further adapt in a way that's healthy? Okay. Because promoting resilience, we're not approving unsafe or unhealthy coping skills. We're just acknowledging those have served a purpose for you. Okay. They have done for you what you needed them to do for you. That coping mechanism did get you through. But can we identify ways that might not be serving you as good as something else could be? And can we try something else? Okay. And it's recognizing even the smallest successes, even a success of you picked up the phone. Thank you so much for answering the phone when I called, right? I just wanted to confirm our appointment. You showed up to therapy. You showed up to your services. You showed up to your appointments. That's a success. You got here into you are in the building with me right now. And that's all the success I need today. That's a win for me. How can we build on this win? But we look at our clients as survivors, as people who have dealt with incredibly difficult hands, incredibly difficult trauma. And we recognize you are incredibly resilient. You are incredibly strong. I recognize that in you. I want you to recognize that in yourself. Okay. We're going to do an activity. So this is a little practice. So we're going to practice what we call using a trauma-informed lens. So using a trauma-informed lens is when you look at someone's behaviors, words, actions, attitudes, and instead of asking what's wrong with them, you ask what's happened to them, what might be going on, what need are they trying to meet with this behavior. Okay. So our inspiration for this is I want you to put in the chat, what do you see in this picture? What is this a drawing of? No wrong answer. A duck, a bunny, a duck, a rabbit or a duck / bunny, a duck, a bunny, a duck and a rabbit, it's a rabbit, a duck, right? So if you look at the picture from the left to the right, starting with the beak, ooh, water bird, I've never heard that one. I don't even really know what that is. You start from the left, you see the beak, right? And it looks like a duck. But once you get to the right side of the image, you see the little nose and the eye and the ears, and it looks like a bunny, right? When we change our perspective and use a different lens, change the way we're looking at something, we can see something different. The image didn't change. This is a static image, right? Static image. Yeah. It has not changed, but we can see something different depending on how we look at it. That is what a trauma-informed lens does for us. Okay. So we're going to practice. I have a few behaviors that we might see in some of our clients, or maybe words that we would use to describe a client who is challenging. And we're going to reframe those behaviors using a trauma-informed lens. So the first one is unmotivated. You have a client who you feel is unmotivated. How can you look at that attitude or behavior with a trauma-informed lens? What else might be going on with this person? What is another way to describe this client rather than unmotivated? So we have overwhelmed, bored. She looks bored, doesn't know where to start. I'm going to put my, what is, she looks tired. She looks worried. She has other priorities. She's sad. Absolutely. Right. She might be depressed, overwhelmed, afraid, or feeling frozen, feeling some of that decision fatigue, right? I have too many decisions to make, too many choices. It's easier to not do any of them. Okay. It's easier to just stay where I am and not make any changes. Or I want to change. I am dealing with some depression and I don't feel motivated. I am not motivated. I cannot tap into a sense of inner motivation. I don't feel it. I don't know that it's there. I need help finding that inner sense of motivation, or I need help identifying what are the things that are going to motivate me, right? What about manipulative? A client who seems manipulative. How can we reframe this behavior or attitude? They're surviving. What else can we say about client who seems manipulative? What's another way to reframe this behavior or this attitude? They're trying to control the situation. What else? Yeah, they need to control. They don't trust. They don't trust others. Maybe they don't know that they're being manipulative. This is what they have had to do. Any other thoughts? To be scared of losing control. Yeah. This is someone who might be getting their needs met the best way they know how, right? They're doing what needs to be done to get by. Remember those trauma adaptive behaviors, right? Manipulation can be a trauma adaptive behavior. It's their attempt to create a sense of security for themselves. It's their attempt to create a sense of control. We're working with people who are often in survival mode all of the time. So the skills that they use most often are survival skills. So we have to see them as just that, survival skills, and maybe help these clients understand you don't have to use those survival skills here. You don't have to manipulate me. You don't have to game the system. You don't have to lie. You can be honest with me. You can be vulnerable with me. I will hear you. I will respect what you say, what you feel, and I will do my best to help you get your needs met. You don't have to manipulate me. But too often they have navigated situations where that's how they get their needs met. They don't trust other people. That sense of trust was broken long ago. So their ability to say, I'm just going to ask for what I need and you're going to do it, that feels like a fantasy to them. What's far more realistic is I'm not even going to ask. I'm going to work my way around whatever I have to do until this lie here and this lie here to make sure I'm okay at the end of the day. And we can't judge them for that. And we can't take that personally. But as we work with them, we're trying to help them understand, you don't have to use those survival skills with me. You don't have to manipulate me. I'm not mad that you did. I'm not mad that you're trying to control it. I see that and I respect it. You don't have to do that with me. I'm here to help you. What about disrespectful? How can we reframe a disrespectful attitude or disrespectful behaviors? What else might be going on? They're angry. What else? Scared. Yep, trying to gain control. They're lonely. They're lashing out. Yeah. They don't trust. They're overwhelmed. They're afraid of being abandoned. Let me break this relationship before you can. They're not used to seeing authority as someone who deserves respect. That's great. They feel threatened. They feel out of control. They don't feel safe. I think it's important, to understand for them, just because you're an authority doesn't mean you're a safe person. And it doesn't mean you deserve their respect, right? They might feel disrespected by you. You might have unintentionally disrespected them, and they're just meeting you with what they felt from you, right? I want us to make sure, because I'm seeing some responses, and these aren't wrong answers, about maybe that's what they're used to, or that's how their family functions. And sometimes that's true. That is absolutely true. But we always want to even see that as, okay, this is how can I see this as a strength and not as, a burden for you. You have to deal with this. This is what you were taught. Maybe it's not what they were taught, or maybe that their parents unintentionally taught them that. And their parents were doing the best that they could too, right? We always want to reframe that, you're not coming to me as the problem, and your parents aren't the problem. Nobody's the problem here, right? This is a survival skill that you've developed, and I see it as that, right? But how can I continue to see it as a strength? And this is hard to do, because sometimes we look at the way people speak and communicate, and we are sometimes the punching bag for some of these trauma adaptive behaviors. And it's a constant practice to say, okay, how can I see a strength here? How can I treat you with respect when I don't feel like you're treating me with respect? Let's see. Okay, I have some in the chat. It's what they've learned. Hey, so along these lines, this is from the chat. Along these lines, I work with teens who had to take care of themselves and feel as though they are adults, but often display behaviors much younger than their age. I try to show them they don't have to be an adult yet, and have had to do so in the past to survive. That's great insight, Pam. I think that's absolutely what has happened. They have carried the burden and the responsibilities of being an adult far beyond what their developmental stage has prepared them for, combined with, we know people who have history of trauma often regress to younger behaviors, right? Their development has had to go over about 100 hurdles that maybe healthy development doesn't, and they're up against a lot. And so, yeah, sometimes when we're working with children or teens, it's about creating an environment for them where they understand you get to be a kid here. You don't have to be the adult in charge. You don't have to be the adult. I will be the adult. You get to be the teen. You get to be the kid. What does that mean to you? What do you think a kid should be able to do, right? What kind of things do you think a 16-year-old should be worried about? Okay, how can we make sure that that's what you're focused on? Helping them identify how much responsibility do they want to have in their life, and giving them that and helping them understand, like, you don't have to be in charge. That's a specific question, Pam. I think it's a great one. And if anyone who's worked with teens can drop some suggestions in the chat for Pam, that would be great. But it's often not so much a here's what to say, and it's more of here's an environment to create where they can feel safe to be the age that they are. And sometimes they need to feel safe to be younger than they are, right? They need to tap into some of those needs that they had as a younger child that weren't met. And maybe we're helping them sort of catch up with some of that. Yes, I can't dive in too much. Due to acting as an adult, often they're resistant to boundaries. Yeah, they feel like they've established the boundaries that work for them, and it's not fair for those to be stepped on. I think that's true. Yeah, they are resistant. I can see that. Well, that's actually one of our behaviors. So hold on to that thought, because we'll talk about resistance in a second. The next one is attention seeking. How can we reframe the behavior or attitude of a client who is attention seeking? How can we reframe that? Attention seeking. What else might be going on with a client who seems to be acting out for attention? Well, they're willing to participate. I love that. You're like, hey, man, you're here. They might feel lonely. They might feel afraid. They know how to get their needs met. They know how to get the spotlight. They want to be heard. That's exactly right. You know, oh, dang it. I have this mistake in I have the wrong words here, but what I meant to say for attention seeking, because I have it memorized, is they're seeking connection. Someone said it, they're seeking connection and they want to be heard, right? They want to be seen. They want to be heard. They are seeking attention. They have not gotten the attention that they need, right? And they're seeking it. They're thinking, okay, well, I'm going to get the attention that I need and I'm going to seek that out. Okay. And somebody said they're willing to participate. Someone who in group is constantly taking the spotlight on themselves. That's a great way to reframe that. If you want to touch base with them one-on-one and say, hey, I love your participation. I love hearing your voice. I think it's amazing. Let's talk about maybe a different way to approach getting that attention, right? A healthier way to get that connection. Again, you don't have to yell, scream, shout to get my attention. I'll give you my attention with no effort on your part, right? You can trust that I'll do that. Another one, and this is sort of what we were talking about in the chat, but resistant. How can we reframe a client who seems resistant? They do not want to change. They do not want our help. They do not want to talk. They do not want to attend sessions. They do not want to come for services. How can we reframe a client who is resistant? They don't trust. They need that connection and trust first. They don't feel connected to you. They want to retain some of that power, stay in charge. What else? What else can we say about a client who is resistant? What could be going on here? They're afraid. Yeah, they see things from a different perspective than you. They just need to feel loved, right? There's a saying from a psychotherapist that says, the certainty of misery is preferable to the misery of uncertainty, right? And what that means is sometimes the misery we know, the messiness, the drama, the stress, the chaos that we know is preferable to anything else that we don't know. So you might say, why don't you just move out? Why don't you just break up with that person? Why don't you just leave that job? Why don't you just do something different? But what we're not recognizing is that we're asking them to give up some of the only forms of stability they have. I don't know how to function in a home where there's no yelling. I don't know how to function in a dating relationship where there's no violence, right? I don't know how to communicate what I want and need and trust that I'll be heard. And I don't know how to take feedback from someone in a non-threatening way. I don't know how. Okay. That's not what I've had to adapt to. I've adapted to this, and this I know. This type of chaos I know. So not only am I going to resist something different, but if I'm forced to be in a different situation, I might even create the chaos there so that it's like what I know. Okay. So we might be working with clients and thinking, I forgot my insight. We might be working with clients and thinking, I have solutions for you. I know what will improve your life. And the client may even agree. They might even be like, I know, I wish. But when it requires change and transitioning into something unknown, that can often be reason enough for them to give up. Okay. Any other thoughts before we move on? Any other thoughts on maybe some behaviors that you've had to reframe the way you see them in your clients over your year, in your years of practice, or something that's come up, maybe a situation or something specific? A lot of you have been sharing amazing ideas in the chat, but I want to give anyone else a chance to share some thoughts or feelings before we wrap up our little practice of using our trauma-informed lenses. Any other thoughts? If we're ready to move on, give me a thumbs up and I'll keep going for us. Beautiful. Okay. So a lot of this is exactly what we were talking about through using these different trauma-informed lenses. But the fourth element here of trauma-informed care is we have to prioritize trust and safety. Trust and safety, trust and safety. If we think about, I don't know if some of y'all remember from one of the videos I showed last week, but they gave an example of, a child who's living with toxic stress. They feel like a truck is coming at them at all times. And, a big semi truck is kind of barreling down the highway towards them and they're stuck and they can't move. And they show that, the illustration of that child sitting in a classroom at a desk and everyone else is working. And you can see in the illustration, in this child's mind, a semi truck is coming at them, right? If we are stuck in fight, flight, or freeze, survival mode, working, dealing with these trauma related behaviors, these triggers, it's like we're about to get hit by a truck. We're trying to jump out of the way of a semi truck. Can we apply, get through a job interview if that's where our head is at? Sit through a classroom lecture if that's where our head is at, right? Can we fill out forms? Can we show up somewhere on time? Can we safely take care of our kids? Sometimes all that, these things feel impossible, much less show up to a therapy session with a client, with a therapist, coherently express how you're feeling, clearly express how you're feeling, work on these areas of growth. Can we do all of that if we feel like a truck's about to hit us? If we are feeling in fight, flight, or freeze, we're in that lower part of our brain. We are not operating in the upper part of our brain where that good learning happens. So when we're working with trauma-informed care, our first priority is making sure this client feels safe. Until they feel safe and are out of that lower brain and into the upper brain, we will not get anywhere with them. Okay. So we have to communicate with our clients. What do they need to feel safe, right? Do they feel safe in this environment? What are potential triggers? And how can we be aware of them? How can we have an awareness of triggers? How can we, maybe if we're working with someone and they get triggered and they have kind of a meltdown, don't ignore it, be proactive. And then once we can feel calm, once we get them to feel calm again, talk about it. Like, okay, what do you know what triggered you? And how can we avoid that in the future, right? I'm not afraid to talk about that. It's okay. I'm not upset. It happens, but how can we work to make sure this feels like a safe place for you? Okay. Respecting privacy, confidentiality, boundaries, and then be consistent, reliable, and transparent. All of these things build a sense of trust and safety. I want to ask you guys though, so we're talking about felt safety. We know that just because someone is safe doesn't mean they feel safe. And when a person trusts the people around them, they feel calm in their environment, this is felt safety. And it's harder for someone with a history of trauma to get to this place. But I want to hear from you guys. So I have another question for the chat. I want to hear from you guys. Just this first question here. What makes you feel safe? No wrong answer. Can be big or little, simple or complicated. It could be physical environment, a sense of feeling, but what makes you feel safe? being understood, structure, kindness, acceptance, familiarity. Yeah, what makes you being seen and heard, treated with kindness, respect, feeling heard, familiar faces, I can trust people, my home and family, routine, support, knowing what's going to happen next, me too, routine and structure, feeling like I'm in control, absolutely, knowing expectations, what is expected of me, stable relationships, planning. Yeah, I'm a planner. I like that. I'm the same way. Having routine, absolutely. A few things that I hear a lot, because I ask this question in all my trauma-informed presentations, because I think it's really helpful for people to think about it. Having enough money makes people feel safe. I've heard also some people say lighting. I don't like a lot of harsh overhead lighting. If you ever, I don't know, if any of you are ever at my house, I never have my overhead lights on. It is always lamps and windows. I never have my big lights on. It's like messes with my head. So lighting can make people feel safe. I've heard some people say, having my favorite blanket makes me feel safe. So it's not just, thank you. The lighting thing. It's not just people feelings. It can literally be our environment that contributes to a sense of feeling safe. Okay. And a lot of times people's response to this is, I just know it when I feel it. I just know when I feel safe. Okay. So I want you to spend some time, this is your homework, thinking about what makes me feel safe. What about my home makes me feel safe? A lot of you said stable relationships, knowing expectations, routine. What about those things make you feel safe? And how can you translate that to your work? Translate that to your space that you build, your office space, your the way you talk to your clients, the relationships you have with them. A lot of us said routine. So maybe that means with your clients, we know I need to go above and beyond to communicate to them. Here's what's going to happen next. I don't know how XYZ is going to go, but I can tell you what I do know. Here's what's going to happen next. Let's get on a schedule. Okay. Let's get set up some automatic reminders for you. Put it in your phone. If you have a calendar app, let's get on a routine so we know what to expect. Some of you might be familiar with trust-based relational intervention. I think I'm actually doing TBRI for Gladney U in a few months. And they're big on rituals and routines. For children who have histories of trauma, having rituals and routines are very, very helpful for building a sense of felt safety, right? Even as simple as if you're doing if you have a therapeutic relationship with a client, you start each therapy session with the same question, the same check-in. And that is sort of your way of organizing yourself and their way of organizing themselves. Say, okay, we're starting therapy now. Every time we ask that question, it's getting us into the space where we're going to start therapy. And then you end it with the same closing statement. What are 2 things you feel really thankful for today? Or what are 2 things you're looking forward to? What are 2 things that you're going to work on for our next session? Something like that, that helps them sort of reorganize. Okay, we're closing the book, closing the chapter on this therapy session. I know that this means therapy is about to end and I can gets me ready to move on to the next thing. We all crave that. I see some in the chat. So in my office, I have a blanket, a Pooh Bear, a Tigger, coloring books. She explains what we're going to do, ask them for questions. It's making us consider some ways to increase safety for neurodiverse folks. Absolutely. So sensory input, huge for feeling safe. If that's interesting, and if you're not familiar with TBRI, I highly encourage you to look into it, because TBRI talks a ton about how our sensory input can increase our sense of feeling safe. I could talk about this for a long time, but let's keep going. So we want to incorporate a sense of felt safety. Trauma-informed care also has to be instilled at all levels. Okay, so it has to be a part of our physical environment. So we've kind of touched on this already, some sensory stuff, maybe the lighting, having fidget type items to help give someone something to do with their hands, blankets, soft, stuffed animals that they can hold. We want our physical environment to be inviting and comfortable, right? Do you have access to water? Can your clients get water? Do they have space? Maybe they're more comfortable walking around while they talk to you, or maybe, they don't want to sit still in a chair. Do we have space for that? Are the exits clear and visible? Do we give them options for sitting with their back to the door, or maybe they want to face the door? Would you like to talk in this room or in this room? We give them choices. Do you want to sit or stand? We want to offer opportunities for sensory input, right? And just remember some triggers and maybe decorating with those in mind. And your best bet at figuring this out, how to improve this, is by asking your clients, getting their feedback, right? If they're in a space to talk to you about that, asking like, hey, how do you feel like this space works for you? And letting them inform you. They might be like, yeah, this was great. They might be like, I hate that picture up there. It makes me think of some XYZ thing. And that's a way for you to sort of shape and adapt your physical environment that you've created for them, right? Even our physical space can be trauma informed or not. And it also has to happen for all staff. Trauma knowledge has to be instilled at all levels. Creating a trauma-informed organization is an ongoing process. There is no end date. Okay. And the reason all levels of an agency need to be on this is because it may seem like this only applies to the people directly providing therapy or services to clients, but all staff, even admin, non-client facing, they need to have a basic trauma education. Okay. They need to know what it is, how prevalent it is, and how it impacts behavior. And we all have to be on board with reducing re-traumatization. Changes to an organization to be more trauma informed don't happen on accident. They have to come from the top. The people who make key decisions about policies and programming, those are the people who have the power to say, we're going to make this a priority. We're going to make this training a priority. We're going to make these changes a priority. And a common concern whenever I'm telling organizations, you've got to implement trauma-informed care, the common concern is like, this is going to be more work for everyone. It's going to be more work for us. But what we know is that when trauma-informed care is done right, it really decreases employee stress. It's empowering for clients and for staff. It encourages collaboration. It encourages sharing workloads, and it's preventative. So we're not just putting out fires all the time. And all of these elements that we've been talking about, looking at the whole person, strengths-based, et cetera, they don't just apply to our clients, they have to apply to ourselves as well. Okay. And that's part of instilling trauma knowledge. So you might be a supervisor who's like, well, I don't work with clients. It's like, great, but you work with staff. Are you trauma informed for your staff? Are you supportive and strengths-based for your staff? Does your staff feel safe in the office space that you've given them, right? You do have a role to play. Even if someone just answers the phone, you can answer the phone and communicate over the phone in a trauma-informed way or in a re-traumatizing way, okay? And then this also, just a little side note, goes beyond organizations to systems, because I'm sure we've all felt the sense of, I'm doing the best I can. I work for a great agency that's doing the best it can. And we're up against a system that's consistently hurting people, a larger system, whatever it might be. And we're going to have a constant influx of clients because of these larger systems at play. And that's really hard. And I don't have great solutions for that, but I just want to make sure you hear me acknowledge it, that this is not an individual fix. And I don't look at any of them. I'm not really looking at any of you because we're virtual, but I don't metaphorically look at any of you and say, y'all got to fix this. I understand. We're talking individual and we're talking systemic. So what can we do? Okay. The last piece of a trauma-informed organization, my personal favorite to talk about, is vicarious trauma. So some of us may have heard of vicarious trauma, some of us may have not. But what vicarious trauma is, it's just the negative effect of caring for others. Okay. It's also known as secondary trauma or compassion fatigue. So it's a combination of physical, emotional, spiritual depletion that's associated with caring for clients who are experiencing significant emotional pain, physical distress, right? We're working with clients who have had such traumatic experiences currently or in their history, and we're helping them heal from it. And that can take a big toll on us. And we want to catch this before it leads to burnout. Okay, so something I want to make very clear. Burnout is a state of being. You're done. Burnout is a destination. Once you've reached it, you need to pull the plug and rethink. Okay, vicarious trauma is inevitable. We will all experience it. We do not all have to experience burnout, though. Okay, we can cope with and protect ourselves from some of the impact of vicarious trauma so that we don't get to burnout. But burnout is not inevitable in our field. We do not have to face that. Vicarious trauma is, and that's what we can cope with. Okay. So some concepts to help us understand vicarious trauma. First, we have what's called the double-edged sword of empathy. So what this is talking about is the more empathetically attuned we are, literally the greater neural activation and shared pain that we experience. So being empathetically attuned means that we're resonating with how someone else is feeling. We're trying to better understand their internal experience. And our capacity to understand trauma and trauma-related behaviors, use that trauma-informed lens, it only enhances how empathetically attuned we are. And unfortunately, sometimes the more we care, the more it hurts. Right? There's also mirror neurons. So our vicarious trauma is really rooted in our empathy for others, and our empathy is rooted in mirror neurons. So these are basically, this comes from research like some 30-something years ago, where these Italian researchers were observing monkey behavior in brains. And what they found was that certain cells were activated in the brain, both when a monkey performed an action and when they watched another monkey perform the same action. It's kind of like that feeling when you're watching something embarrassing happen to someone and you feel that secondhand embarrassment. Those are your mirror neurons, okay? It makes our brains act as if we ourselves are experiencing some of what that other person is experiencing. So when we're working through trauma with someone, our mirror neurons are firing off and taking a toll on us, okay? So some risk factors for increased vicarious trauma is your own personal history, feeling overworked or overstressed, having too many responsibilities and not enough boundaries, that limited professional experience of being thrown into the deep end. Nonprofits are famous for this, trial by fire, sink or swim, and then limited success. So feeling like you're on that hamster wheel. I'm doing everything right, and I'm playing whack-a-mole with my client's trauma where I fix one thing and another thing pops up. I'm not getting anywhere. I'm getting burnt out, okay? And when we have these experiences, it creates trauma-related behaviors in ourselves, okay, as professionals. So we start to feel we're behind on tasks. We're overwhelmed by our usual workload. We have stress from our work life or our personal life, and it overflows. We don't have good boundaries, or we have totally compartmentalized them. My very first job as a social worker was so traumatizing to me. I could not even drive by my exit. So on this highway where I exited to get to my office, if I was on that highway for another reason, just driving by the exit, I started feeling some of that toxic stress bubble up. That's how traumatized I was by that work. So I had to take routes that wouldn't take me past that exit. That is too much compartmentalization, not healthy. That was a trauma-related behavior, right? Feeling on edge around certain clients or work environments, experiencing irrational anger, strong emotions, assuming the worst of your clients, assuming the worst of your colleagues, assuming the worst of your agency. Every email that comes through a policy change, your first thought is, here we go again. These people don't know what it's like to do my job. They don't know what it's like to be where I am. They don't appreciate me. automatically assuming the worst, a lack of trust, okay? Or gaps in memory and frequent forgetfulness. These are all on, a lot of these are from that compassion fatigue scale. Paul, I don't know why I always think his first name is Paul. His last name's Figley. He created the compassion fatigue scale, things like flashbacks. Do you have flashbacks connected to clients? Do you have intrusive thoughts after working with difficult clients? Do you feel depressed as a result of your work? A sense of worthlessness. These could be word for word descriptions of victims of trauma. We are the victim of trauma when we're talking about vicarious trauma. We have the trauma-related behaviors. We have the trauma adaptive behaviors that we've developed to cope and get through our day-to-day, right? We have to be aware of that and have room for that. And just like trauma-informed care has to be implemented at all levels, it's not on our clients to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. It's not on us to fix our own vicarious trauma, okay? Addressing vicarious trauma in the workplace is the final element of trauma-informed care. And it's, in my opinion, one of the most overlooked, because agencies struggle sometimes to understand how they have a responsibility to address the vicarious trauma of their staff. Your agency must provide support, supervision, consultation, right? You deserve a supervisor who says, hey, when things are going wrong, I'm right here next to you helping you. And when things are going really wrong, I am really right here next to you helping you. You're not in the deep end by yourself here, right? You are supported. You have supervision. You have someone who's going to take the heat when things go wrong. You have someone who's supervising you, who's consulting with you, right? You have continuous and quality professional education, opportunities to go to trainings just like this. Not to toot my own horn as like, this is a quality professional training. I hope it is. But you have an agency that says, yeah, take the day. We'll survive without you. Go to that conference. We'll find money in the budget for you to attend that training, right? That's okay. We want you to get the best training possible. And at that ongoing training, especially when it happens in person, you just get to meet people. You get to talk to people doing different types of work and hear from them. And it can really enhance your practice. An agency has to provide clear limits and boundaries with clients and colleagues. So it's not just your job to have boundaries for yourself, but your agency has to have boundaries for you, right? My supervisor is really good at saying like, oh, you did a presentation last night. You need to leave early, go home. What are you doing here, right? Flex your time, take care of yourself. An agency that respects that so that it's not constantly on you to be saying, sorry, no, sorry, I got to flex. Sorry, I can't work this weekend, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Having those good boundaries encourages when you're off the clock, you're off the clock, okay? I love this joke I saw that said PTO stands for prepare the others, because I'm not going to be there, right? Like when I'm not here, I'm not here. And you respect that and I respect that, okay? And then lastly, they do encourage therapy and self-care. So the last thing I want to finish on is talking about self-care and putting it in its rightful place. So again, I think for too long, agencies have looked at vicarious trauma as like, do your self-care, do your self-care, do your self-care, right? It's your job to prevent your vicarious trauma. That's not really fair to us as workers, right? Self-care can only go so far, especially self-care that is not really preventative. It's more of a Band-Aid. So when we talk about self-care, because I do want you to feel empowered, it is a key part of giving yourself that protective factor, that buffer to sort of soften the blow of some of your vicarious trauma. When we talk about self-care, we are talking about what I like to call preventative self-care. Elements of a healthy and balanced lifestyle that make us less sensitive to the vicarious trauma, that help protect us from the impact of the vicarious trauma. Because too many times we talk about self-care as like, today was really hard, you're going to go take a bubble bath, right? Have some extra wine tonight, knowing I'm going to be right back here at this same office being stressed out just as much as I was today, right? That's not caring for myself. Preventative self-care is the habits, the practices, the intentional work that you do, even when things are calm, so that when stuff is really hard, you've got that buffer built up. You've got that energy stored up, that care for yourself, right? So I have some different categories here, but the last thing I want to open up the chat for in our last few minutes of the presentation is asking you guys, how do you practice true preventative self-care? What do you do? Or maybe what would you like to start doing to help increase those protective factors so that you can better cope with the vicarious trauma that we face in our work? It's inevitable. It's part of what we do, but we deserve to prevent some of the impact of that. So what do you guys do for preventative self-care? So we're not talking just the stuff I do to throw a Band-Aid on after a really hard day. It's this is what I dedicate time to. Exercise, working out, absolutely. Getting time outside, I'm the same way. If I don't have time outside, I'm a mess. Oh yeah, so prayer, spirituality, huge, absolutely. Exercise, yoga, meditation, taking time off, use that PTO, knowing my limitations, setting my boundaries, not staying up too late. That's kind of hard for me. Shared experiences and prayer. Yeah. Alone time, yarn stuff. That's funny. Walking on the trail. Great. Taking naps, not to know it all and be it all. Oh, you guys are amazing. I love these. Please, if you take a minute to look through what everyone's doing to do that preventative self-care, I think this is great, y'all. I want to make sure you hear me say sort of my final thought on self-care is it is not just about what are you doing to be a better therapist, to be a better CASA worker, to be a better professional. You are more than that professional role. So you deserve self-care that feeds your soul, fulfills you just because you deserve it. It's not all about what are you turning around and bringing to this agency, right? We look at our clients as a whole person. We deserve to be seen as a whole person as well. Okay. So how does this preventative self-care help you be just the best you that you can be? And that alone makes it worth it, right? That's exactly what we want our clients to hear too. You don't have to heal from this trauma to be a better XYZ. We just want you to heal so you can be the best you that you can be. We deserve the same perspective. Okay. That is all I have for you guys today. I'm going to share this PowerPoint with Ashley, like I did last week. Before I leave, please fill out this evaluation. I'm going to drop the link in the chat so that I can keep track of my numbers and just get your feedback, et cetera, et cetera. I'll make sure to get a PDF of this presentation to Ashley. And other than that, I think I finished us up right on time, 11:28. That is all I have. Yeah.